All right, everyone, welcome. We'll let people keep trickling in here, but thank you everyone for joining so far. Couldn't be more excited for today's panel. We brought two individuals that I've been able to have the opportunity to get to know. Personally, I worked with Taylor at Qualtrics for a number of years, and Scott had the chance to meet through this opportunity of starting Alyssas. Hopefully everyone here today is expecting to learn about productivity, how to improve your sales day, and couldn't think of two better people to kind of walk us through their processes and the success that they've seen in their careers. We wanted to get started today initially with a quick introduction. So let me share my screen real quick. Hopefully that comes through. Perfect. So talking about 10-point productivity framework, this is what the Alyssas platform is actually built on. Happy to dive into it a little bit after this with people. But kind of one of the giveaways that we want to do for today's session is we've actually templatized our 10-point framework for AEs and SDRs, etc. And so anyone that is joining today, we will send these out to you and get a free copy of these templates to go and implement in your day. But let's get to the meat of it. So really excited to kind of jump in and let these two introduce themselves. Like I mentioned, I worked with Taylor for a number of years at Qualtrics, been a good friend over the years. And Scott Leese, again, like I mentioned, met through this journey. I'm sure every single person that is joining today knows Scott, big figure on LinkedIn, but I'll step back and let him do his own introduction. So Taylor, why don't you kick us off, introduce yourself, and then we'll let Scott jump in and introduce himself, and we can go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Grateful to be here. Really fast. I've spent about 2 decades in sales. Started out my career in almost a basement company with 15 employees and saw that turn into an $8 billion company. I've spent the last few years in sales leadership and currently leading or heading up sales for a cybersecurity company based out of Bath, United Kingdom. So it's called Netcraft. But grateful to be here, and I'll pass it over to Scott.
Yeah, thanks. I may have more people who know who I am from LinkedIn, but Taylor has far and away done better than me, building an $8 billion business in his time as CRO. But I spent the better part of 20 years building and scaling sales organizations across the tech landscape from all over the world as an operator, as a VP of sales. In the last few years as a fractional VP of sales, CRO, consultant, advisor, whatever you want to call it, and run a consulting company where I work primarily with early stage startups, sort of Series A, Series B, and help them figure out their go-to-market motion. I'm excited to be here and learn a little bit from Taylor and Aaron and everybody else, and hopefully contribute as well.
Yeah, so you see we've already got chats coming in calling Scott the GOAT, and couldn't agree more. So hopefully, everyone, like I mentioned, is here to understand productivity a little bit more. When we talk about there being a gap in sales, we see that gap as the ability to answer a really simple question, like how do I know that I've had a great day in sales today? How can I tell my manager that I've had a great day in sales? And I'm going to let Taylor kind of jump in and talk about this in more detail in a minute. But we implemented a framework at Qualtrics that we used. Excited to hear from him and kind of talk about that a little bit more. But when you think about these kind of primary questions, you come into the office every day. We know that in sales, no 2 days look the same. Some days the calendar is empty. Some days you have 5 back-to-back demos. We essentially wanted to be able to create a platform and a place to be able to say, I know that I've had a good day. Here's the benchmark. This is what it looks like, and almost create a shield to management to say, I know today didn't look like yesterday. I know tomorrow doesn't look like today, but each and every day I can be as productive as possible. And so that's what we built the Alyssas platform around. Like I mentioned, happy to talk to anyone after this about the platform itself. But really wanted to come in and help you answer that question. Like, what does a great day in sales look like? So I mentioned everyone gets a copy of the KPI framework after this call. But for us, it was to be able to go in and identify which KPIs made up my day. And everyone knows that sales has changed significantly. When I started my career, it was literally cold calls and emails. And that was kind of the bulk of my day to try and generate those meetings, to do the discoveries and to do the demonstrations. Sales has changed. Now it's, obviously an omni-channel approach to your outreach. But we also feel like there's so much more that goes into a good day. Things like debt creation, right? You should be recognized and rewarded for that. It can take a couple hours every time you do it. When you're traveling, you're at an on-site. In the CRM, it doesn't look like you've had a good day, even though you are putting in the time to obviously move deals forward. So the framework, as we go through it, and again, Taylor kind of dive into a little bit more, is essentially built to answer that day. The question, how do I know I've had a great day in sales? So like I mentioned, we put it into a platform. This kind of allows every single rep and manager to track what they're doing within the day. We look at it like a Whoop device, right? You buy a Whoop device to try and measure yourself, increase your performance every single day, do the right rest, do the right recovery to be performing at your optimal cadence. And that's the way we think about sales, right? We are all in this business because we want to make money, hopefully. A lot of other careers you could choose if that's not one of your goals. But how do I perform at my top capability and top performance standard? And so I'm going to throw it over to Taylor real quick. Let him kind of jump in and talk through the ways that he's implemented frameworks in his career. I'm going to give a little shout out to Taylor. So you've been in this industry for a number of years. You were 12 years at Qualtrics. I think your persona, like you were known as that guy that was kind of a first in, last out. I know that you're still doing that. You had a phone call with Justin. It was 7:30 yesterday. You were still at the office grinding, right? Like that's always been part of your persona. Tell us a little bit more about your journey from early days Qualtrics to today, things that you've learned and seen along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and appreciate the shout out as well. I'm going to first start. I wish that I would have had, and here's the shout out that I'm going to provide Alyssio. I wish I had the Alyssio platform a long time ago versus what we did have. So first off, back in the day, I'm going to start with the not so good. The not so good was I was a mathematics and finance major that found myself in sales, and I was wondering what was I doing in that career. And for my first 6 to 7 months, I was on a journey trying to figure out how do I create repeatable success. I believe winning requires repeatable success, and success requires a plan and consistent execution. And I had not internalized and learned that principle. And it took me about 8 months of struggling, not hitting my quota, blaming my lack of success on others, and not following a potential framework that Aaron had talked about in the beginning. And I found myself at the lowest performing account executive. I was fortunate to have a mentor and team leader at that time, or sales manager, that instead of obsessing over the outputs, we started to obsess over the inputs, which are directly in my control, versus wanting and having a desire to hit quota or hitting quota is somewhat outside of our control. If we take that by itself, hitting quota, there are a lot of inputs that we can control that end up enabling us or increasing the probability of us hitting quota. So that was the conundrum. I was at the bottom of my cohort. I was the lowest performing account executive, and I was in desperate need of finding a solution or leaving to find another organization or pursuing my finance dreams of working in that industry. And I quickly pivoted and started focusing in on how do I define, or what does it mean to me to win the day? What are the inputs that I need to do, or I want to do, or I will choose to do on a daily and weekly basis that will increase my probability to hit quota? And so my mentor and sales manager there started to actually create a framework. We created something that was called an A-team report. And the A-team report measured activities. And one of the other inputs in this A-team report was quota. And so I was on the F team in activities, in prospecting calls, IQM set, opportunities created, but I somehow was on the A team in quota attainment. And what I quickly realized is that was not attainable. So that went from how do I actually create this repeatable success? And I fully embraced this framework and input strategy in controlling my success. And I went from bottom of the barrel, and this isn't about me, and I give all the credit in my success to my colleagues and mentor and team lead, but to one of the top performers on the team by following a framework and understanding the importance of daily and weekly inputs and breaking up my quota into those highly controllable, directly controllable activities on my end. And so that was a lesson learned almost in the basement days, less than 20 employees, as we started scaling that company to 5,000 employees plus, and a very successful exit with SAP, $8.5 billion exit. But frameworks matter. And if you are allowing yourself, if your leader hasn't talked to you about them, or if you're an individual that's struggling, I promise you there's an answer that can help you. And it is adopting those types of frameworks and creating that repeatable success and focusing on those. I think Scott will talk a little bit more about this later, but those leading indicators from a team or business unit, but you can apply that at the individual unit that will actually help you achieve that quota on a repeatable process. So those were some of the frameworks that we had actually created at Qualtrics. What was fascinating was we quickly evolved from this 18 framework to a point structure. And this point structure could then be applied to SDRs, AEs, customer success managers in a very different way, to where we would measure the most highly valuable activities that would drive pipeline and quota relief. And we'd start focusing on how do we achieve an 8-point or 10-point day. I think you talked about a 10-point framework at the beginning, Aaron. And that really changed us going from 10 to 20% of AEs hitting quota, to where when I left, I think over 50% of account executives across over 1,000 sales employees were hitting quota at the end of my tenure at Qualtrics. So that principle was learned at Qualtrics. I think it's one thing to be in an organization where that's applied and you learn those things. I think it's another to actually be then a sales leader and say, okay, how do I apply this correctly? Because the challenges that you'll face are a couple. One, when this was first rolled out, the natural reaction with an account executive is, why are they doing this? Why do they want visibility into all of these metrics? Why does, if Scott's my manager, why does Scott want to micromanage me? There's a lot of questions that naturally start coming up when someone rolls out this point framework, versus at the heart of this, if you're a manager, explaining, why, or starting with why this is so valuable, but also getting into the details of this is a leading indicator dashboard for them, or framework that will help them identify where the weaknesses are in their prospecting cadence, in their opportunity to create additional pipeline. And it's an incredible instrument that helps AEs or sales individuals, or really anyone, because you can cater this point framework to any role, to understand how do they maximize their calendar and increase their efficiency. So it's one thing to actually learn this and adopt it and say, hey, you're going to use this as an account executive. It's another thing to actually institute this and apply this in other organizations. And so I'll quickly talk about this in one or two organizations, and then Aaron, I'll hand it back over to you and or Scott with any questions. But after my tenure at Qualtrics, I went over, and it was an early stage startup. And at early stage startup, there are three distinct phases of an organization where you're really identifying and how to understand, how do we get product market fit? I think there's a second stage where you're really trying to nail it and scale it, and figure out what are your bets, how will they pay off, and how do we then start scaling them? And then there's a third distinct stage where it's this hyper growth, and how do you start differentiating your organization from a product standpoint, GTM standpoint, marketing standpoint. And so I joined at this early stage product market fit, and this framework was still highly, highly consumable and valuable at that stage. It helped us actually go out and secure several Fortune 500 organizations that were new logos to this organization. It helped us find and onboard the correct talent and individuals that were willing to adopt this type of framework and understand how we were actually going to approach our sales productivity and efficiency. And so there were benefits in pipeline generation, quota relief. There were benefits in recruiting and ensuring that we're actually finding the right individuals at that right stage, more curious, intellectual curious individuals, but also willing to adopt that type of a framework. And we applied it to our SDRs once we quickly pivoted from a product market fit into more of like a GTM fit on the SDR side and the sales side. And so that really started helping us identify what's going right, where are the gaps in our prospecting activities, is it messaging? And so if you think about it, it's pretty easy to identify what are the needed leading indicators to hit quota. How many prospecting activities? What percent actually convert over to IQMs or initial qualifying meetings, that initial discovery meeting? Of those initial discovery meetings, what is the percent that actually converts over to opportunities? Of those opportunities, what percent do we win and at what value? And then how long does each one take from opportunity creation to close? If you have those 5 metrics, there's probably a couple more, but those 5 are quintessential. And that was very instrumental for us in that new business and starting out pre-revenue to really start identifying some of those gaps in the business, in our GTM motion, and with specific individuals, so that I knew exactly how to coach the right individuals at the right time. So if you have these leading indicators and these ratios established, it's very easy as a leader now, instead of saying work harder or, hey, train on these materials, I know exactly, like if Scott was my leader, Scott could come to me and say, Taylor, I'm going to work on your pipeline or your prospecting to IQM ratio. You're calling a lot, but you're not seeing that conversion ratio into IQMs. It's your messaging. Is it your ICP, like who you're calling? And so having these frameworks not only helps you with define, as you put it, Aaron, what is a good day or how do I win the day? This helps us in a number of other areas, from a leadership standpoint down to an AE standpoint or a business standpoint. Understand where are the gaps and you can solve them very quickly. I'll share one last story and then I'll throw it back over to you, Aaron or Scott, with any questions. There was an individual that I personally mentored. He did not sell one deal his first 6 or 7 months. He wanted to quit. He was not happy. He was struggling. And what we were not doing is we were not paying attention to this leading indicator pipeline. How many prospecting activities then go into IQMs, then go into opportunities created, and then how long these progressed. Once we actually sat down and level set on this and identified several gaps in these with these skills, we mapped out what is the enablement plan, and he went to work. I obviously joined several meetings with him, but it was all to his credit. Within 6 months, he had sold a number of deals and was actually took 3rd place as Rookie of the Year his first year in sales, even though he didn't sell one thing his first 6 months. So this is just a testament to the framework that obviously, Aaron, you and the Alyssas team have built. But these frameworks matter both from an AE standpoint, SDR standpoint, individual standpoint, and leader standpoint. And it's worked time and time and time again with different companies in different industries. So I'll stop there. Questions from you or Scott, or if you want me to touch on any additional items here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always see when we have conversations around the frameworks, right, is I think as a rep, your instant reaction is, oh, I'm about to get micromanaged, right? And how did you essentially turn the frameworks at a manager level and say, it's not micromanagement, like this is an opportunity for me to coach you and train you in the right way? Can you maybe just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think that's fair. Like when my manager at the time was rolling this out, that was my initial reaction. Like, you want visibility to everything I'm doing. You want to measure everything. You want to know when I go to the restroom, how many breaks I get. And it was a little frustrating. But once I actually understood the purpose and how he genuinely cared about me and wanted me to succeed, that's when it all changed. And so I think there's power in, I'll share another story to answer this question. Another rep comes to me and says, I'm struggling to pay the bills with my family. And he was on a different team. He moved over to my team. That is the worst experience to be in, like situation to be in, to hear someone that you're working with struggling to do that. And I said, okay, let's back our way in. What is your quota? And then we took his ratios. What are his ratios? And I'll just call him as John. I said, John, if you make 3 more calls a day without us focusing on any other skill development, you will hit your quota, make the money that you need to make or you want to make, and make sure that your family's in a better position. Within, it wasn't that quarter, the next quarter, John exceeded his target, and he was well on his way to earning 3 to 4 additional promotions and scaling in the organization on the sales team. And I'm glad he transitioned over to our team. But when he realized that these leading indicators or these KPIs and these ratios matter, and when you pay attention to winning the day and ensuring you're doing everything you need to get done that day, it was freeing for him. It was the exact opposite feeling that we would probably think if a leader instituted this, because it allowed him to know exactly what he needed to do on a daily and weekly basis. He could get more done in less time. And then on Friday, instead of staying till 5 o'clock, given, like I said, it was freeing, he would get all of his stuff done that he needed to by noon on Friday. And he would say, hey, I worked my butt off. I deserve to leave. I'm going to go take an early day on Friday. And I know that I'm doing the necessary inputs to get the outputs that I want. And he got exactly where he wanted to be 3 or 4 months later. So explaining the whys, and then also understanding that these frameworks, yes, they're measuring a lot, but why are those measurements so important, and understanding those is the exact opposite of micromanagement. It's the most freeing thing that you could actually embrace, pay attention to, apply, and then see the results and measure the results as you compare yourself to who you were yesterday or the week before, the month before, instead of comparing yourself. Like, if, Scott's the GOAT, Scott's the best enterprise rep, let's say, in the sales org, it doesn't help me to compare myself to Scott every day, every week. What is more important is to understand what's worked for him, apply a daily framework, work with my team lead and manager on some skill development, and then compare myself. Where was I last week or last month, and see and measure the growth over time. That is the freeing aspect of this framework.
Yeah, and I saw in the chat, so ... make more calls, right? And I think this is also kind of leads into that natural reaction from sales reps when things like, productivity is tracked and weighted. I'll speak personally. I was at Qualtrics. I came back from Australia. I think I missed my first 3 quarters. And my manager, I went to him like, hey, by the way, I'm leaving. I'm going to, company around the corner. And he's like, why? And that was my opportunity to kind of look at myself. And he's like, look, you can do this. Like, you can stay here. You can do this. He's like, you got to pull your socks up. But I will coach and mentor you to go and hit quota. And what he actually identified in me, and to the make more calls point, is like, I wasn't ever making cold calls. That wasn't my thing. He didn't ever ask me to make more cold calls. He sat down and said, let's go through what you do in a day. Where are things actually working? He's like, you're out emailing everyone else on the team. Oh, and they're all custom as well. He's like, I'm not going to go ask you to make more calls if that's not where you're effective. Go do more emails. Just turn that dial up. And that was a pivotal moment for me. Went on to hit 7 out of 8 quarters in a row. But at the end of the day, like, product didn't change. Pricing didn't change. I changed, right? By focusing on the metrics that worked for me and able to go and replicate that. Scott, you, I don't even know the number. Amount of startups that you've worked with, coached, sales teams you've been a part of. Feel free to give us numbers if you have them off the top of your head. But you've seen a lot, right? You've seen a lot of behind the curtains, how the engines are working at these organizations. And you teach a lot about leading versus lagging indicators. Maybe jump into a little bit from your experience, like what you've seen that works, what doesn't work from the companies that you've been a part of.
Yeah, so the number is roughly 140.
Give or take a couple.
Yeah, give or take a couple. I think I have equity in 60 companies right now. I've lost track of how many I'm advising at the moment, but you're not going to get disagreement from me in the leading indicators and the framework that Taylor shared. But I saw a question in the chat, and it was already kind of a direction that I was planning to take my kind of segment here, and that's, what are some new leading indicators, or what are alternative leading indicators, or how are these leading indicators potentially evolving? Mm-hmm. And, we don't have enough time to dive into everything that Taylor's doing, but I bet if you spent time with him, he would tell you there's other stuff that they do that is not on this list. And it's a little bit different than what they did 10, 20 years ago. So I jotted a few notes. So, one of the things might be something that I would label as an experience delivered, right? And what I mean by that is, let's say that I know Aaron is a massive football fan, right? Watch the Euros, through and through all the way. If I'm desperately trying to get a meeting with this guy, and I know that, I might know that his favorite team that he supports is Liverpool. I might get a scarf. I might get a Liverpool scarf, mail it off to him, write a handwritten letter, see if that does something to spark a relationship. I might send him 2 tickets to a match and, say, hey, I know you and your partner are trying to find time to talk about our solution. Here's 2 tickets to the game. It'll take you an hour to get there. The game is 2 hours. It'll take you an hour to get home. You guys have 4 hours to talk about everything, what we do. I just carved out time for you. It could be anything, but that's what I would call an experience that you're delivering to somebody. That could be a leading indicator. How many of those type of experiences are you creating for people in your kind of prospect base? Okay. It could be doors knocked. Pause on that for a second. It could be doors knocked. In the era and age where everything is automated and robotic and AI driven, one of the things that we are missing and craving is human connection. Mm-hmm. Pretty soon, when the AI gets good enough, you might not be able to tell the difference between an AI written email and a human written email. But you can definitely tell, in the foreseeable future at least, the difference between a human knocking on your door and a robot knocking on the door. So I know a lot of people who are going back to super old school methodologies of doing things in person. That could be a leading indicator and a metric that you track. It could be number of affiliates that are acquired. I'll pick on Taylor for a second. Taylor's selling to, security officers, CEOs, founders. Let's say he's also selling to sales, VPs of sales, which I don't think he is, but let's just say he is. Okay. Taylor should get his team to put together little lists of 100 accounts, 200 accounts that they're trying to break into. Right. And he should be going to people like me, board members, investors, advisors, influencers in the space, and reaching out to them and trying to sign up affiliates. He should be trying to turn me and 100 versions of me into a referral channel for him. So he should be sending me over this list of accounts and contacts he's trying to talk to and saying, hey, Scott, if you can make an intro to any of these people, we'll pay you 10%, 20% of first year's ARR or whatever, right? That's an easy motion. So how many of these kind of affiliate referral partners are you signing up every single day or every single week? That could be a leading indicator. It could be actual referrals that you received. So Taylor sends me a list of 100. I know 2 people. I make 2 introductions. This dude just opened up $500,000 in pipeline, not having to cold call, not having to email, just from me being able to look at my network and say, Taylor wants to talk to Kelsey and Robert. These are my best friends. Let me just text them right now. Boom, bang, pipeline open. So the referrals you're receiving could be a leading indicator. It could be turning your network growth into a daily KPI. In a world where connection requests on phone, in a world where people picking up the phone is becoming more and more rare and call rates are dropping, okay? And people responding to emails is going down every single day, right? And it's difficult to get a hold of people. One thing that you can do is build your network as big and strong as possible, because this kind of referral-based motion, we've always known it is more successful. What's happening now is it's moving from the very highest of enterprise levels down funnel to more low enterprise to mid-market, even to SMB. And if we can open up opportunities through our network, less painful, right? So you can track that. Now, a dashboard in Salesforce or HubSpot is not going to sync with LinkedIn because they don't play nice in the sandbox together. But Taylor can look at all of his reps right now, go to everybody's LinkedIn profile, put a little leaderboard together that shows Aaron, Scott, and Taylor and how many connections they have and how many followers they have, and say, listen, y'all, you have a daily KPI now of adding 10 to 15 new people every single day to your LinkedIn network. Every single day. That increases the visibility of your personal brand. It increases the visibility of Netcraft as a brand. It increases the possibility of signing more referral partners and things like that. You can track that and you can gamify that. That could become a leading indicator. It could be the number of events you attended. Events like this. Questions get asked in these chats all the time. I can tell you right now that I have plucked business from webinars that I've sat in on, not even ones that I've been a part of, somebody asked a question over there. Caleb Coate was asking this question, right? So I wrote down that name. You best believe that I'm going to go back to him, message him, and be like, hey, if you want to talk more about this, let me know. Happy to have a meeting with you and your team. That could become a piece of business. So how many of these events are you going to, or your team going to? That could be a leading indicator. It could even be, how many pieces of content did you consume today that helped you get better? How are you learning? What podcast did you listen to? What book did you listen to? What webinar did you show up to? Anything you're doing to get better could potentially be considered a leading indicator towards success, towards pipeline, towards revenue. All of those kind of things, I would say, are more modern kind of or newer kind of things that not that many people are maybe tracking and looping in the same bucket as, like, how many calls did you make today? How many emails did you make today? But these things are increasingly more important and increasingly more effective than some of the older traditional methods. So those are, a half dozen things that I was thinking about that I wrote down that I wanted to share.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and say, I didn't pay you to say that, right? That was off the cuff, right? But that's the way that we think about it. That's the way we think about it, Alyssas. It's like your sales day has changed. The reason why people don't do those things, I believe, and Scott, feel free to disagree, Taylor, jump in. I think the reason people aren't doing those is because they're not recognized or rewarded for doing them, right? Like, that's not part of the KPIs that they get measured on a day. It is the calls and the emails. Do you see that more as like sales organizations have to adapt, they have to grow, they have to get with the times? Is it like a technology gap? Like, why are people not doing those things that seem so simple, Scott?
My personal belief is it's not a technology gap at all. Part of it for me is what you said, is they're maybe not incentivized, or maybe they are actually disciplined for doing some of these things rather than being rewarded. So the incentives are not aligned. Usually that comes from old school leaders who don't understand these motions and are relying on whatever worked for them, in the past, and they don't think anything's gonna change, and they're scared. Honestly, that's what it is they're afraid, right? And when people are afraid and scared that their livelihood's at stake, their job's at stake, I could become obsolete if I don't learn this new motion. When people are scared, they lash out.
Yeah.
And they become sort of fake passionate in a way, full of anger and bitterness and vitriol. And they want to tell you that, you're really, really wrong. Another reason they don't do that is some of these things I mentioned, you have to have a network in order to participate in. And so if you haven't spent time building up a network, you can't run this motion as a referral partner or an affiliate type of a thing. And so it requires turning a mirror on yourself and saying, shit, I've neglected this for the last 5 years. I looked at it as only for gurus and self-promoters and, people who want to take selfies and stuff like that. It's not that those things don't exist. It's just you have limited yourself because you're only seeing it through that lens, not these other use cases and these other lenses that are starting to make more sense. And so we have to stop, as leaders, we have to stop and recognize that whatever worked 10 years and 20 years ago is not necessarily guaranteed to work right now.
Yep.
And it's certainly not guaranteed to work 5, 10, 20 years in the future. And you have to evolve. I'm sure Taylor doesn't run his team the same way today as he did when he started. I know that I wouldn't, right? So we have to look at things and start to reward some of these indicators rather than just outcomes, right? We might have spiffs that we put together, sales contests and stuff like that. Everybody here has probably been a part of a sales team that had a contest and the number one seller, wins something, right? And it's based on revenue only. But what happens is 80% of the people opt out of that competition because they don't believe that they can win. Mm-hmm. So you're now maybe only motivating the top 10, top 20%. And even there, it's like, no, Taylor's going to win for sure. This guy always wins, right? Change it up. Don't have a contest around the outcome, how many deals closed, how much revenue you brought in. have a contest and reward people around how many new opportunities did you open? How much pipeline did you create? Who has the best Salesforce hygiene, health score, pipeline health score? Who has the best ratio of pipeline to quota? There's a million different sort of indicator metrics that you can gamify and reward people on rather than just the outcome. So reward people for doing the things that you know contribute to success. Don't just reward people for the success, right? So that's some of the reasons that I think.
Yeah, no, I love it. And maybe Taylor, to that point, you have seen things change. You've run teams of different sizes, commercial all the way through to CRO. Like, where have you seen things change? And as, a leader today, like what Scott is preaching, does it resonate? Does it kind of go against the grain with how you see things? Maybe talk a little bit about your experience in seeing those changes and how sales has evolved. And then at the top now, from the top down, how are you running your sales organization?
Yeah. Well, I'm taking notes. Like, Scott, this is great. This is a masterclass in, modern evolved sales. I think there's some things that we're doing here and some things that we can improve on. And I'm always going to be the leader that says, hey, I don't know what I don't know. And let's go and improve and do something different. How I've seen this change. I mean, obviously I was mandated back in the day, a long time ago, hey, make 100 cold calls or like you're fired. And I'm like, oh geez, this is a great environment. But like, it really did evolve. And I think where we've seen, I mean, that's why you probably have seen different companies that are empowering reps with video. Like, instead of doing a cold call, you send an email and it's a video pitch of someone, going through their pitch. You've seen a lot of these things, AI, the emergence of AI. How do you actually do this? I think some sales leaders, and I don't want to speak with a broad stroke here, I think it's hard for them to dive into the unknowns, as Scott mentioned. And then there's a control aspect, but I also think it's, how do I track a lot of these things? And I think sometimes leaders get scared to where, if I can't track everything, do I want to encourage our team to do that? And I think it's a very different message than, hey, let's have a pipeline contribution or a pipeline creation competition that we're running here right now. And at the end of the day, I don't care how we get there. Like, if we want to knock doors or send a specific package or work with marketing to send a very catered message with a really cool swag box from Netcraft, those things get responses, to Scott's point, because not everyone's getting a very specific message catered to Scott and his needs with a really cool, like, Netcraft polo or a new, surf hat that Scott could take on another, one of his trips. Like, that would resonate with Scott, and I guarantee I'd get a response. And so we want to continue to explore those here at Netcraft and empower our team members to feel like they have the resources and also the support to go and explore those. I will say, though, that I don't believe cold calling is dead. Maybe it's on life support, but there are some good success stories that we've also seen here, but it's how you go about that. Like, I reached out to one of the top, probably 5 largest banks in the world, and I did what Scott did. If someone's going to say, Taylor, cold call in here and help get pipeline. There was an individual who lost all of his pipeline one quarter. It was just one of those quarters where everything went wrong. And he came to me and he's like, I'm freaking out. And I'm like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. And I'm going to be in the trenches with you, and let's go get some pipeline. And so we decided that we'd go and do this. And I reached out to my board, and I'm always going to cheat. I'm going to stack every single thing in my favor to increase my probability of winning. And I referenced this conversation I had with a board member with the CISO of one of the largest 5 banks in the world. And within 2 days, 2 senior vice presidents, I sent one email. I said at the end, I'll call him John again. Hey, John, if I don't hear back, I have your cell, given, our board members have your cell. I'll reach out to you in a couple of days or later this week if I haven't heard back. And I wasn't threatening to use it or anything if you're going there, but it's just letting him know that I know him and I have his cell. 2 days later, 2 senior vice presidents actually reached out to me and said, hey, we'd like to schedule a meeting. And so, to Scott's point, it's not I'm not encouraging just cold calling. Use customer references. Why don't you actually call the last 5 customers that we close that love us and go get 5 referrals from each of them? You could go set meetings very effectively and efficiently with that idea versus hey, I'm going to knock out 30 cold calls.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of unique ways where you can kind of blend this old and new. and evolve and go and get the production that you want. But there's a lot of new technologies and new things emerging to try and help sellers be effective in their roles.
Yeah, I think back, I think it was 2019, we were trying to close a deal with a very well-known indoor cycling company. And at the time we were trying to get that deal across the line. And, you know, what it took was I had to fly to New York. I leveraged one of our partners. We got a suite at the Yankee Stadium. I pulled in our CEO, we pulled in their CEO, and I just stepped back and said, like, you guys go chat. Next day we closed it in the back of a taxi, right? And it's like, I'm not cold calling him, right? That's not going to work. I'm not going to email him 50 times. It's not going to work. It's, to Scott's exact point, like, leverage that network. And I think that's really crucial, Scott. So like when I started Alyssas, I think I was like 4,000 followers on LinkedIn, right? And against my, comfort levels, everything, I just said, hey, I'm going to dig into the social network piece. I'm going to go in and expand my network there. What can come from it, we'll see. It's kind of somewhat intangible, right? You get to that 10,000 followers mark and you start to see things coming together. You've been at the forefront of this. For anyone that doesn't know, Scott, you're over 100,000 followers, I think, on LinkedIn. How valuable has that been, and how do you leverage that network, right? As one of the social media greats in our space, like, what doors does that open for you? How do you leverage that from a sales perspective?
Oh my goodness. Initially it was leveraging it for recruiting purposes. I didn't want to pay or hire an internal recruiter or pay for a staffing agency or literally spend money on job ads and things like that. And so I literally showed my bosses like how much money I was saving them in recruiting fees by building my network and allowing me to do stuff like make a post saying, hey, I'm looking for AEs at Alyssas or Netcraft or whatever. And then just getting all this inbound, right? As my kind of numbers got bigger, I leveraged it in distribution of some of the books that I wrote. So I wrote this book in 2017 called Addicted to the Process. I thought like 10 people would read it and that would be it. And, I don't exactly remember where it started, but all of a sudden people started kind of reading it and talking about it. And then I had the idea of, well, why don't I just like give away 1,000 copies if anybody wants it and see if, it spreads like wildfire. So I made a post that was like, hit me up and I'll mail you off books. So I'm mailing books all over the world at my own expense. Before you know it, more people talk about it. It lands on like bestseller lists. I'm making royalties every month. And then people leverage that book to learn more about what I do. And then they're like, oh, this guy runs a conference called the Surf and Sales Summit. Let me go check that out. And so people start buying that. And they're like, oh, this guy does coaching and consulting. And so you go from like a network action that delivers no near-term revenue to you to a negative cost action, which is me mailing a book to New Zealand, which costs like $15, right?
It's a long way away.
To somebody maybe listening to a podcast and then purchasing a ticket to an event that's a couple $1,000 to hiring you as a consultant, which is $100,000 deal. Those types of things, all of that is because of the network. When I left my corporate job almost 5 years ago, I made a point to say, I'm going to do this in a way that I'm not going to have to prospect. I'm not going to have to cold call. I'm going to do it these other kind of ways. So in 5 years, I have not prospected for my consulting business.
All the A's getting
everything has come through referrals or through LinkedIn. You could argue that writing content is prospecting 100%. You could argue that being on webinars like this is prospecting. I'll buy that argument. You could argue that hosting a podcast or guest appearing on podcasts is prospecting. Yes. But I'm not sitting there with a list making 100 calls a day anymore. I'm not sending 100 emails out and personalizing things. So you're asking me like what the value of this is? I've done millions in the last few years with no employees for the first 2 years and one employee for the last almost 3 years. So you're talking about like 92% margins on millions of dollars of revenue per year. all because of, you could argue, all because of this network that I've cultivated.
Yep.
And I'm able to monetize in all sorts of funny ways. Like, I was making a joke earlier about Taylor putting a list together and sending it to me. That's actually not a joke though, because I run this motion all the time. I just yesterday helped somebody close a $30,000 deal for their company. That's $3,000 that comes my way in 30 days. All I did was text a friend of mine that I know. That's it.
No.
Anybody here can do this if they have a network and they put themselves out there, and you're referring people to Alyssio or Netcraft or whatever. Every company will pay you at least 10% on the first year revenue for doing things like that. And I'm nowhere near the top in terms of who's, killing LinkedIn game and all that kind of stuff. But I have been doing it for a really long time. And I've seen lots of different evolutions of it. And, those are just a few numbers and ways that I can demonstrate some of the value for me personally.
No, I love that. Yeah, I spoke at one of our local universities the other day. And I was like, look, if you don't listen to anything else I talk about, like, I hope you walk away from this creating a LinkedIn account in college, right? Like, start now, because it takes time. It's such an, untapped resource. I think if you want a career in sales, people, scared to put themselves out there, be visible, get judged for being cringy or whatever it be, right? But like you just spoken about, millions of dollars of revenue generated from a network in sales. That's not tracked in a CRM anywhere, right? So some of those intangibles. One of the things we always like to ask when people come on our podcast is, like, what does a great day in sales look like to you? And I think kind of unique perspectives here. Scott's probably on a surfboard and a deal closes while he's paddling, right? Like, nice way to do it. But like, really, we'll start with you, Scott. How do you define a great day in sales? And then Taylor will jump over and let you answer that.
There's a few different ways that I would measure this at this point in my life, and I may be at different stages than other people, and I would probably give a different answer if I was at a different stage. But for me, I've got to make $5,500 or more per day, or I would not call it a great day. Mm-hmm. For those of you who want to do quick math, $5,500 a day translates to roughly $2 million a year. So anything lower than that, I'm not saying it's a bad day, but I'm saying that's not a great day. So from a monetary standpoint, I think of it like that. I think of it from a standpoint of the balance of how much shit did I have to do today that I didn't want to do compared to things that I enjoyed doing today and I wanted to do today. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that balance is skewed in a not good way. Sometimes it's perfectly balanced. Sometimes it's heavily skewed in I did mostly things I want to do today. Getting to a place where you can even engage in that dialogue and figure out that balance is a good spot, I think, to be. And that's kind of where I'm at. So a great day to me is I did more things that I wanted to do today than things that I didn't want to do. Right. And the last main metric for me would be, how many new connections, how many new opportunities did I sort of unearth and generate today, combined with how many people did I positively impact today? So one of those things is like new opportunities, new connections, new conversations. Those things benefit me in the long term, but it also gives me the opportunity to serve and to help other people. So I try to look at that also as, how many of these people did I get to help out in some way today and make an impact on? That makes me feel good, which helps it be a great day. So that's how I'd answer that for now.
I love that. And Taylor, obviously you're B2B SaaS CRO right now. What does a good day look like to you?
Yeah. I was not going to answer it this way, because Scott, like, that was, I loved how genuine it was. And like, I could tell it meant a great deal to you. Like, I was going to answer like, okay, if I'm an AE, what does a good day in sales look like? Like, there are generally three things I focus on. And I've already shared this on a different conversation with you and Justin, Aaron, but I'm really focusing in on creating pipeline. I'm focusing in on progressing and closing pipeline, and I'm bettering myself. Like, that's what reshaped my career early on as an account executive. I think now my day looks very different, to Scott's point. And I mean, Scott's probably challenged me a little bit in an indirect way of just like, what does that mean to me? Gosh, like I would go to my daily priorities. I'd ensure that I actually deliver on my commitments. I'd really be focusing in on, I mean, if you boil down what a sales leader's job is it's to help their team members or individuals have more success at an accelerated pace. Like, who am I meeting with and how am I helping them either win deals, focus on skill development? And so, and then another piece, like I kind of sold my soul to like my career for a while, and I've recently like refocused myself. And I think, you know, being at home for my kids' bedtime is something that I really look forward to if I can, just because I've got 3 kids and that means a great deal to them. And I'm starting my workday earlier in the morning. So that's kind of probably how I would answer it personally, but I've got to work on that answer. And I love Scott's answer, and I'll have a better answer next time. But from an AE, that's how I'd answer it. Struggling AE that was really refining his career. And then right now, you know, focusing in on direction, alignment, and motivation. That's probably the 3 distinct areas that I really want to focus on a daily and weekly basis.
Perfect. And then, yeah, there was a question in the chat talking about skill versus will, right? And I don't know how many AEs the 2 of you have coached, mentored, managed in your careers. Talk to us a little bit. Taylor, we'll start with you. Like, when you see a sales rep either that is struggling or, you know, absolutely crushing it on the other end of the spectrum, that balance of skill versus will, how have you ever identified it, measured it, tracked it, coached to it? Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
This is the most critical thing to get right. It is so exhausting and frustrating when you're a struggling account executive or just trying to figure out how to scale your sales career. When your leader comes to you and says, work harder, step up, do more, increase your productivity. Like, why didn't that meeting go well? Like, what are you doing? How did you not convert that? Like, I teed it up. These are all very frustrating conversations that we probably have too frequently. I hope I don't, but like identifying the skill and will, there are so many times where when you have the data in front of you and you're monitoring these leading indicators, to Scott's point, but also those conversion metrics as to what % of opportunities is converting, you can identify exactly what are the skills that we should go focus on to take advantage of the will. Maybe they actually only need to increase their will output or their activities by 10%. If we go solve this skill gap and we can go and increase their skill by 20% and increase their win rate, that is hugely impactful, or just increasing their average deal size. So this skill and will, if your mentor and leader is not tracking this, start tracking it immediately. And you can start identifying where are the skill and will gaps and go and solve these very, very quickly. Scott, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
I don't think that there should be that many people on your team that have a will problem, or you have a problem in your recruiting process and your talent attraction that you're bringing in. Most high performing teams are full of people who have the will to be successful. It doesn't mean they never wax and wane and normal human emotions, you know, take over sometimes, and there's a low moment and high moments and whatnot, but they've all got it somewhere inside of them. So I tend to believe big time in creating a culture of development where all of these things are talked about in the open all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about skill development. This is 2013 to 15, I think. I had a couple hundred reps in a couple different offices working for me. I believe so much in this skill development thing that I created optional sales trainings every single day at 7 a.m., 12 p.m., and 5 p.m. Because some people like to get to the office real early and they're early birds. Some people like to do a lunch and learn. Some people like to stay in the office late and miss an hour of rush hour traffic. I wanted to appeal to everybody and give everybody the option to come to as many as they want, or as few as they want. I would lead the trainings. My directors or my sales managers would lead the trainings. They're on different topics, closing this, opening this, pipeline management, this, whatnot. You're talking about 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, optional, 60 hours a month of skill development training, right? When you're putting that much time and energy into your team, they can't help but improve. And improvement in skill usually leads to improvement in will and desire and ambition and all these things. So you improve somebody's skill, it often takes away the need to manage to will, right? So if you've done the right job, you've got the right will people in there, spend time cultivating a culture of development, work on skills, and you won't have to manage to will as much.
It's unbelievable. Well, what a session, learning from both of you. Very grateful. Hopefully everyone in the chat has enjoyed the discussion. It's been recorded. We'll send it out to everyone. You'll get your 10-point framework after this. Last piece as we wrap up. Taylor, if you could go back 15, 20 years, what would you have changed about yourself as a salesperson to today? And then Scott, you too, and you got 1 minute each. What would you have changed?
Don't waste time. Be all in. Like, I wish I could go back and tell myself when I was struggling, I was making every excuse not to buy in. And I wish I would just go back and say, don't waste time. Just go be all in and embrace that opportunity. When people are all in, I think that solves a lot of the will, and the skill starts coming because I start identifying, hey, Scott's the best at presenting, or Aaron sets up the most demos, so I'm going to go watch them. Don't waste time. Like, I promise you the work is worth it, and how you apply yourself effectively is worth it. And the outcome will be great if you actually define how you win the day, how you win the week, and go do it. Scott?
Be more all in.
This time Taylor stole my answer. So now I'm the one. Now I'm the one who has to make one up. What I would say is that I spent too much time in the early days lamenting the fact that I didn't have people to learn from and learn with. Now I'm old enough that there was no LinkedIn, there was no podcasts, there was no webinars, none of this kind of stuff. That's my excuse factory talking. The reality is I could have done something to surround myself with other early VPs of sales in the early days 20 years ago, when I was trying to figure out how to build and lead sales teams rather than just figuring it out as I go. And I didn't. And that was a huge mistake. I think that delayed or limited some of the success that I had and put it off a little bit towards later on. So by doing stuff like being a part of communities like this, surrounding yourself with the right people who are in similar stages of life and career as you, and talking to people who are where you want to be someday. Don't wait on those things. That's stuff that I didn't do a very good job of in the early days that I would do differently now.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, I appreciate you both. Thanks so much. Taylor and Scott and my LinkedIn's are in the chat. Feel free to connect with us. Hopefully it's been a great session for everyone. We appreciate you attending. And Scott and Taylor, thank you both so much.
See y'all.
Appreciate it. Take care.